You're listening to the UBC Medicine Learning Network.
Hello everyone, welcome to a special edition of the MEDamorphosis podcast, designed to help medical students and those considering medicine to navigate their medical careers. My name is Chris Pang, I use the pronouns he, him, and today I am joined by Celine McCochran-Contreras.
Hello, my name's Celine, I use the pronouns she, her.
We are both fourth-year medical students at the UBC Vancouver Fraser Medical Program. We are very excited to be collaborating with MEDamorphosis as past co-leads for the 2S LGBTQ+ in Medicine Mentorship Group and as students who helped found Outreach, an online platform where queer physicians, both faculty and residents, can be out to UBC students, allowing for meaningful mentorship relationships to develop.
Today we are interviewing one of our wonderful preceptors and now mentor, Dr. Eva Moore. Dr. Moore uses the pronouns she, they, and is an adolescent medicine pediatrician at BC Children's Hospital. She has worked with young people across various intersections, including sexual and gender minority youth, for over 20 years. With such important work, we are so excited to have them on our episode celebrating queer identity in medicine and how it intersects with career development. We are grateful to Eva for sharing her stories and wisdom with us.
Before we begin, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are recording from the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As we reflect on queer identities and social justice throughout the podcast, it is important for us to center our talk with a decolonial lens that celebrates and empowers all diversity. We are committed to listening, learning, and trying our best with our community towards reconciliation.
Please note, this podcast was recorded during the ongoing COVID pandemic and as such was conducted over Zoom. Thank you for listening today.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Moore. It's really nice to have you here and to see you again.
Can you call me Eva?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us today, Eva. We wondered if we could start just sort of talking about how you came to be in medicine.
Yeah, sure. So both my parents are doctors, and I have both of my grandparents on one side were doctors as well. So I actually didn't want to go into medicine for a long time. I felt like I just needed to kind of figure out my own path and didn't want to I didn't feel pressure, but I didn't want to feel like I was pressured to go in any sort of direction. So I started out college without it would being a chemistry major and not being pre-med or anything like that. And, but then kind of as I went through, I became kind of disenchanted with chemistry, and I didn't want to be a chemist per se. And I wasn't really interested in teaching chemistry or teaching science. And so when I thought about, I really love working with people and I love science, and well, gosh, the natural kind of thing that leads to is to think about medicine. And so that's kind of where I got to. My job, through in and out of university or college, was working at Planned Parenthood, and I'd volunteered there in high school, and then got hired on doing little stuff back in the lab, running tests and cleaning up rooms and things like that. And I just loved being in the environment with the nurse practitioners and with the patients. And so I kind of entered with that idea. Initially thought about nursing and nurse practicing, but I didn't really have many mentors in that regard in my family. And so I kind of got steered at that point into medicine, and thought I was going to, always had a passion for working with young people and with teenagers and in sexual health. And so kind of entered, in that realm. When I finished college, I hadn't finished all of my pre-med stuff, and I hadn't done my MCATs and things like that. And so worked for a couple of years in Philadelphia, in Center City, Philadelphia. And I got a job as like a HIV hotline counselor and sexual health hotline counselor. And I loved it. It was like better than like anything I had been exposed to in university or any kind of like formal teaching setting. And I worked with the teenagers, started doing like outreach and like educational sessions, like for after school programs and things like that. And that was really like foundational to me. And I got like that job evolved a little bit, that I got to kind of be the leader of this teen peer education program where I worked with these teenagers in Center City, Philadelphia. And we would go to like all the communities in Philadelphia, and the teens would do the teaching, which was much better fit for me because I wasn't really into teaching per se, but I liked guiding the teenagers to be the, teachers. And it was just like so foundational to me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. But I wanted, I'm going to get more education. I want to have more experience. I want to have more be able to be a little bit more of a leader in this kind of field. And so I entered medicine, like kind of with this vision of, what I hope to do later on, I guess, which was really helpful because I found medical school like very, very difficult. I think there's just, it trains you to be so many things all at once. And it was really easy to kind of lose track of why I was there and what I was doing. And it's so different than what I'm doing now in my career. So I was really glad I took that extra time to kind of just, I guess, not be a doctor and just kind of explore other things. And those youth that I worked with in Philadelphia were just so inspiring. They were just amazing and had come from very different backgrounds than I had. And we're also like trying to navigate this like newfound independence. Like, I mean, they're quite a bit younger than me, but I had just kind of moved into the city and never lived in Philadelphia before. And they were also navigating the city and trying to like figure out, how to live on their own, not on their own, but like in their own sense of self, like being a teenager and kind of figuring out who they were. And yeah.
It sounds like adolescent medicine, what you're doing now, and pediatrics sounds like it was a really organic fit, given that sort of story you just told us. But was there ever any doubt?
Oh, yeah, of course, right? I doubted it all the time. I don't know how much I doubted medicine per se, but I think at some points I was like, oh, I wish I knew more about other careers, because I could have been like a psychologist or a social worker, and I could have been doing like this so much earlier, but yeah, I mean, I went into medical school and right before I went in, like kind of at the time that I was applying, I heard an adolescent medicine doctor speak. And this guy is like kind of known for having a lot of, being a really strong mentor. And so I was really fortunate. I just happened to like go to one of his trainings that he was giving to nurse practitioners and nurses. And as part of my job, they're like, hey, go to this training. I was like, sure, and he was just really inspiring. And so I was like, oh, there's actually a field for this, and so that was really amazing. But I actually wasn't sure that I wanted to do pediatrics. And so I went into medicine thinking I just want to work with teenagers. And it's like every field has teenagers. You could be a surgeon, be a trauma surgeon. You could, there's just so many different things. And I initially thought about OBGYN because of my interest in gynecology and sexual health. And I thought about that, but I really wasn't interested in surgery. So it was kind of easy to kind of take that off the list. But after that, it was really tricky because in the US where I was at that time, like you can go into adolescent medicine from internal medicine and family medicine and pediatrics. And you don't even have to go into an adolescent medicine fellowship. You can work with teenagers in a number of different fields. So, I kind of was very, mercurial, I guess, in terms of where I was headed. And then once I did my pediatric rotation, I remember I did my residency, my medical school in Baltimore. And it's a very, it's a very diverse population. So the folks that I was caring for in the hospital, there's a lot of, poverty and social exclusion and just a lot of people who were very much in need. And so that was a something I think there's a lot of hospitals that are like that. There's the, healthcare or health needs are not equally distributed in the population, but that was an important part of that as well. And I just remember this one time, this like kid, I was on my pediatric rotation, this like 2-year-old just like reached up for me and was like, wanted a hug. And I was like, this is pediatrics, right? This is why, like, it doesn't matter the medicine you use or the people you work with or, side by side, but like, it's the patients and it's the families that drew me in. And I was like, thank God I like pediatrics because it's such a natural fit for adolescent medicine. But yeah, that was a transformative day when I realized that.
I was personally curious about your time in Baltimore, and I understand you also did a master's in public health.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about like where you did that kind of schooling and what drew you to it and the story behind that.
Yeah,
and your experience
absolutely. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and then I was like, I need to get away. And so my college was in suburban Philadelphia, which also was not getting away. It was very similar to growing up in Seattle. And so not in that way, but just wasn't that urban experience I was looking for. And like I said, I talked about that experience in Center City, Philadelphia, of just being so important. And so when I was looking at schools, I ended up going to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, which I thought would be quite similar to Philadelphia, but it's actually like below the Mason-Dixon line. So it's just got a little bit more Southern culture to it. And it's also even more poor and disenfranchised than Philadelphia was. So I found it a difficult place to enter, and especially entering kind of with a lot of privilege, being in a medical school bound to have this very, prestigious career. It was actually quite difficult to figure out how to kind of take that on. And so I kind of was drawn to public health in that regard, of feeling really kind of in a way helpless as a community, as a provider and as a doctor, of like, gosh, there's so much social stuff that I'm up against with my patients that, yeah, sure, I can like give them antibiotics and cure their pneumonia in the hospital, but they're going to go home and they're just, their asthma is just going to flare again because they don't have a safe home to go to. And so I felt like research and public health and kind of taking that broader look was another way of trying to make a difference and try to help communities that maybe like that one-on-one relationship wasn't going to be able to do. And so I really wanted to look at that in a different way. And I guess I think of like, the circles of influence, and how, we can kind of think about genetics influencing health, and we can think about the family and the school and the community and then social policies, and all of those things have their influence on the health of that individual. But if I just focus on like the genetics and the stuff we're taught in medical school, which antibiotics to use, is like, in the end, like, it doesn't actually matter what antibiotics I use. Like, what matters is the policies that, why this kid isn't in school and why isn't it safe for them to walk around their block, and all those things that go into like health and wellness. So yeah, I really wanted to do a public health degree. It was just a matter of like when I was going to do it. And so I was fortunate enough to go back to Hopkins for my fellowship in adolescent medicine. And I was able to do the public health degree at that time. And at that time, I was really focused on research and kind of thought I was going to go down a research career, but I'm glad that I didn't. It didn't work out in that way. It's just so competitive. And I think I also found research limiting because it's so much of a question, and it removes yourself so much from the patient as well. And so, yeah, finding that balance, I guess, is part of it. But I was really glad to have had all of that intense research experience so that I actually can understand research better and can be kind of critical of it, I guess, and know where the value is, as well as kind of where maybe it's not providing value too. So
thank you for that. It's interesting that you consider yourself not a researcher while you have completed some scholarly projects, I would say, and you do continue to publish some papers as well. So that's interesting about
Thank you, Chris.
the identity
That's very
between
nice.
a capital R researcher versus, a clinician, or the identity between clinician and researcher and combining those. So as part of our podcast as well, and thank you for agreeing to this ahead of time, we did want to get to know you a bit more on a personal level too. We wanted to ask you about where you are from and your family and what it was like growing up where you grew up.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I grew up in Seattle, and my mom's a psychiatrist. My dad is a reproductive endocrinologist, and I have a younger sister as well who has absolutely decided not to go into any kind of higher education and lived off the grid for a period of time, and now does these natural beauty products, which are really amazing, and uses invasive plants to make beauty products and other things. So we have a really kind of diverse family, I think, just among ourselves. We didn't grow up with relatives. Our extended family is all kind of in the Midwest. And so we were kind of raised separate from that. And I had just an amazing education in Seattle. My parents sent me to this really fantastic high school that was very social justice oriented. And it was just a very, very good environment for me. So, yeah. So I guess part of this podcast is really to talk about what it's like to be queer, I think, in medicine. And it's interesting that you now, we've been talking, for a half an hour, and I haven't even talked about that yet. And I think that it's that's part of this balance that I'm still trying to find of how do you bring yourself into your profession? Because clearly I'm telling very personal stories. Is very much my own journey. And yet it's really easy to just leave out that piece of myself because I think I've just gotten used to not talking about it. And, hopefully that's changing for your generation or will change. But it's definitely always part of my family. And the messages that my parents taught me was not to talk about it. So that's passed on down from them, even though they personally are very accepting. They specifically said, don't tell your grandmother, don't tell your family, don't tell your uncle, and also even about working at Planned Parenthood. I come from a very Catholic family, and, I was doing sexual health stuff. It wasn't even I didn't enter it to, even though I do feel about advocacy and, and having very much pro-choice, but I didn't enter it to be an advocate. I entered it to provide healthcare to people. And, but I wasn't allowed to share that either. I was discouraged to share that piece of myself too. So I'm very that's just very natural to me. And I'm trying to recognize it and challenge it a bit more because I want to get to a point where I can talk to my patients and to my colleagues and, and to my students about the full piece of this journey, and the full piece of who I am. But yeah, this process of coming out to myself, when I was in Seattle, I didn't come out. I didn't really quite recognize it, even though I was in a very kind of accepting environment. It wasn't on my mind in that way, I guess. I just didn't have a label for it. But then when I got to college, I came out within 3 days. I was oh, all of a sudden I have to describe who I am to other people. And I guess that's who I am. So it became very clear that that was what I was going to do. And then, and then once I kind of got more into profession and then took a full-time job after college and then into medical school, it's coming out again of okay, well now how am I going to talk about it? And I kind of went back to that teaching that my parents gave me of well, don't share that, and so it became very clear to me who I had in my head, okay, I've come out to these people, I haven't come out to these people. So I would just kind of separate who knew, who didn't know, I don't know, like it's not all up to me, like they may have known anyway, or so talk, somehow, but in my mind, I had this very like clear idea of like, okay, I'm going into this, into this interview. I'm not going to talk about, my wife, or I'm not going to talk about my partner or my girlfriend or my sexual identity. Like, it just isn't something I'm going to do. And it was a very purposeful thing. And like, if I decided to talk about it, it's a very purposeful thing. And so it's just so easy to not know how to fit it in, I guess, or how not to talk about it.
I think it's so interesting because I think myself and Chris and a lot of our colleagues, like we found each other, like those days before we found each other in medical school, it was very much like, I don't know if it's learned or if it's kind of like there, or I don't know where that thinking comes from, but sort of retreating, because I think for myself, I was also very much coming into medicine like comfortable, and most of the spaces that I worked in and lived in was very open and out. And then when you get into a new space that's, a space that we put on a pedestal, like medical school, I think, again, I was like, am I supposed to tell this to people? Like, how much should I tell this to people? And it's so hard, like you said, because it's such a part of us. Like, for myself, I feel like it's so important in the way I live my life that it's weird to go into spaces and not bring that. I was talking to Chris about this. I was watching, what you do over the break. I was watching Queer Eye, the newest season that came out on New Year's Eve, and it was Karomo Brown, and he was talking to somebody. He said, and it really stuck with me. I went and looked it up what he said. He said, for me, coming out gives the power to the other person to accept or deny you, when what you're really doing is inviting them in. That really stuck with me. And so I appreciate you inviting us in, and I'm trying to think about that as well a lot of the time. But I don't know, Chris, how have you navigated this, like your life and your queerness, and how's that been for you?
I think it has been more subtle in ways of listening to what clinical spaces are, like the vibe that they give off. And certain remarks will kind of help or hinder me in my process of how much I want to share or not share, I think. And that's kind of been how I've been navigating it. I know for us, Eva, it was interesting how it came about, like this whole topic, that we had like a mutual patient encounter, and that I decided to come out to this patient because I felt it would be helpful for them, because they were in a difficult space. And then I just mentioned something about Lil Nas X to the patient, and they're like, "Oh, are you?" And then I'm like, "Yeah." And then we bonded in that way. And then I remember actually it was the patient who outed me to you, Eva, that we were talking about like cooking or like plants cooking, and I was like gonna bake, and then she's like, "Oh, you know how to bake? That's how you keep a man, right?" And I wasn't sure how that would have landed with anybody else, really, but I really did appreciate how it landed with you, Eva. And then we kind of debriefed it after, and then talked about our identity that way. So all this to say that I think it sometimes comes out organically.
I think that was really brave of you to come out in that situation. And, it's something that's always a choice, like you describe it as organic, but like you chose to do that, you didn't, it was absolutely not necessary. And there's lots of ways that you were bonding with her without having that be an element of it. But I think it is brave to kind of take that leap, and then to recognize that, like, yeah, they may not keep that same confidence that, that we might have, and so what does that mean? Like if the parent finds out, or your attending finds out, or, and all of that. Yeah. So those are the things. I think I overthink it all, right? We probably all do, of, when is that right time or not? And so, yeah, I just am, as you were talking about, I've thought of all the times that I didn't come out, and there was when I was in residency, I really felt like I didn't want to come out. At that time, it was more like a personal reason. I'd broken up with my girlfriend, and, I was just really not in a good place in a lot of ways. And so I didn't want to have to talk about, because I knew that the next question would be, well, are you dating someone? I was like, well, no, so I didn't want to go there at all. So I just decided not to talk about it very much. And I definitely had my friends that were very supportive, and my residents for the most part knew, but among attendings and definitely with my patients, I just didn't feel in the right place to do it. But then then I came to to fellowship, and felt much more comfortable in fellowship, and and then definitely now. But even as I came here, I had a patient who I'd seen for a number of years, and she was finally 19, and I met with her, and for some reason I decided to tell her, and I hadn't before. I decided to tell her that that I was queer and that I had kids, and she's like, why didn't you tell me this before? And she had two moms herself, and so we were, a lot of what we had talked about, when she was, a patient of mine, and when she was kind of struggling, was because of, well, she perceived it as having two moms, and she felt like she had, gotten, had difficulties with her peers because she had two moms, and she felt kind of isolated because of that. And so she's like, why didn't you tell me that? And so I was like, oh yeah, maybe this could actually help my patients of not feeling so alone or not feeling so isolated, because when you are a teenager, it's your world is only what you see sometimes, and you don't necessarily have it is important to have those experiences and have that broader view of things. And so now I'm trying to rethink how to do that, but I haven't gotten there to figure out exactly how I'm going to do it, just recognizing that could be valuable.
As we go through the CARMS process, and as we become budding residents, what would be your kind of wisdom that you have to impart to our listeners about this whole process of inviting in?
That's such a good question. And there's definitely no right answer about it, and I think, Celine, what you were saying about every new environment is a new opportunity to rethink all of it, and CARMS being, so many new environments and new potentials and everything. But I think it is important to be yourself. And, if that's the best way of expressing yourself, and to be honest about, who's moving with you and why you're considering, this kind of program and what led you to do this medicine in this way, that it's absolutely relevant. And it's so important for us to figure out how to share these things that really are relevant to who we are and the choices we make and the things we're looking for, and if we don't, I think it can get in our way and it can limit our opportunities. But I think, yeah, just being honest is just gets you a lot further along. And, there's always going to be people who don't understand, I guess, or don't have that experience. But what I've found is that when I'm comfortable, then people can kind of take that lead. And I guess I know this more with raising kids. My kids there's not any other queer families that I know about, at my kids' school or at their preschool, but there's no way that I can hide, that either my partner I can hide or would hide, the reality of our family situation is definitely not good for our kids either, and so because we're just so forthcoming about it, nobody can say anything. They're just follow that same tone of the conversation, whether or not, they feel comfortable or not. And occasionally you'll get these kind of questions that it's oh yeah, that maybe they don't have a lot of experience with queer families or queer people. You kind of get to know that over time, but definitely not at first glance, which is kind of what I always expect, is like, I'm going to come out to someone who doesn't understand, and I'm going to get like this feedback right away from them of like, of negativity or something. But that's not actually what really happens, I think, So yeah, I think it being able to talk about it and maybe even if you're not comfortable, like to practice, I think that would have been helpful for me to be able to practice it a little bit more, because then maybe I would have been able to figure out how to talk about it in a way that was useful, for those interviews or for those kinds of things. But yeah, I think having like this kind of mentorship that you guys are doing is a real opportunity too. Hopefully it gives people the chance to figure it out a little bit more for themselves of how they want to approach it, how you want to talk about it.
Thank you for that. That was so healing and refreshing for me to hear. Not sure about you, Celine.
I think it's so interesting because I think that there's messages that we receive as we go through this process that, like you say, that, sometimes we won't say things, or we're constantly trying to just sort of evaluate the safety of our surroundings. It was really interesting to say, like, when you become a parent and those choices are no longer necessarily just reflective of, it has to be for your child as well. And I'm going into that space. And so I wonder how, like you already mentioned, but I wondered if you could speak about how being a queer parent has been and how it's impacted all of this.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I love being a parent, and it was something that was just so important to me that, like, I just knew that I wanted to have kids for a long time. So that was just really grateful that I have the opportunity to be a parent, and my kids are 6 and 10. So just it's been a really fun journey so far. Being a parent has, like, in our family, kind of shifted things. So for my partner, Hope, it was just like a blessing for her family is to have kids coming into the family. So they, I think, had just, like, once Hope came out, they really thought that she wasn't ever going to have kids because that's like the stereotype, I guess, that queer people don't have children. And so, when they met me and heard that I wanted to have kids, that was like, they could accept me because of that. And so it's just really focused on kids. So that was really nice. And then, so kids are a blessing, I guess, in a lot of ways. It's been harder in my family, quite honestly. Like, I think that kind of homophobia that I mentioned before, of my mom not wanting to have people know that I was queer and in the family and stuff like that. Like, my extended family's completely changed, or, I'm out, they all came to my wedding, there's lots of other queer people in my family, and they've all come out, so the last, 20 years, or even like 10 years ago, we were all out at that point. And so things really did shift. But yeah, like that homophobia, though, that my mom has, really, like, the kids brought it out even more of, well, you can't, how could two women raise two boys? You guys don't know anything about boys. And that kind of stuff has we've been dealing with that a lot with my mom. But I think that happens in all families. Like, there's all this stuff that comes out raising kids that are like, wow, like, there's all these issues and childhood traumas and perspectives and everything that come out. But yeah, I think finding those, like, connections with others is really interesting. We don't have a lot of connection with other queer people in Vancouver. It's just not, I think, having kids, you have less time to, like, do social things and do events, and especially since our families are away, all of our vacations, all of our time off are like traveling to see family, so I think that's going to be something we're going to have to figure that out a bit, especially for our kids. I think it's going to be important for them to know other queer families. But we also have the benefit of, like, both my sister's queer and Hope's sister's also married to a woman. So we have these, like, we have these queer families and queer role models, like, within our extended family. So actually, like, those trips and vacations are very like affirming to all of us as well. So I think that's how we manage it, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, I think families, there's 3 million different ways to have families, but for some reason we only often see and talk about one. And so it has felt like a very, an area that I didn't know was so heteronormative.
Yeah, that's just so true. I think I was telling you this before in another conversation. Like, I've never felt so heterosexual at being pregnant and being with my children. And I feel like this new like need to be obvious and out. Like when I first came out, I like had rainbows on everything and pink triangles and, and all this stuff of like feeling like I needed to like let people know who I am. And then I didn't feel like I needed to do that anymore. And then now with kids, it's like, oh my God, like people just assume that I'm heterosexual, and that's fine. Like, it's not like it's wrong. Most people are heterosexual, but it's so much more, often. And even when I'm with my partner and, my partner started dyeing her hair so that she wouldn't be misinterpreted as the kid's grandparents, because she's an older parent, and, all this stuff that we do to like, that we feel like we have to do to really kind of justify, yes, I am the parents of these children. We are the parents of these children, and so yeah, I've started like thinking like, I should get those rainbows back out again, because it just expresses like who we are, like it's just I'm not heterosexual, and so it's important that I'm not interpreted that way all the time.
For our listeners, I would love to hear more about your story with Hope and how you guys met, and yeah, how it came to be.
Awesome. Yeah. We have a funny meet story. So I was in residency in Seattle, and she had moved to Seattle a couple of years before, I guess, from New York City. And she's very much a New York girl. But, there's a certain point in New York where you just, you can't like own a place, you can't have a yard, you can't have a garden. And she's like, I need to leave. And her sister had moved to Seattle, so she moved as well. And so at some point in Seattle, she told her, she had a number of queer friends, but they were all kind of partnered up. And she's like, I need to meet like single lesbians. Like, it doesn't, you guys are good and all, but like, I need to meet, and not necessarily to date or be set up, but I just need to like be able to hang out with people who are not like partnered up all the time. And so her friend, who's also a doctor and took this very seriously, type A personality, like invited her friends and said, you need to bring a single lesbian to this party. So it's like, it's a party of single lesbians. So you have to everyone needs to go out and find one and bring them to this party. And so there was a few of us in residency who were out and together, but I didn't know this girl very well. So this girl was like, you need to come to this party with me. And so I was like, I don't want to go. But I did end up going to the party, and that's where I met Hope. Every time we had a fight for a long time, she's like, well, I'm going back to the party and choosing someone else. And then the other thing that happened is I'm like really allergic to cats, and she had 2 cats at the time. And so once it like became clear that it was getting serious between us, she gave her cat to her parents. And so she would say, well, I'm going to go get my cat back. So those are the 2 things that would happen if we broke up. But no, we've been together, since like 2007. So 15 years almost. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned something earlier that was like a homophobic experience with your parents. And that really resonated with me because actually my partner, Joel, and we've been together for 4 years now. And my family is new to Canada, first generation. They are quite Christian as well. And so it's been quite a journey navigating this. I am out to them, but we don't really talk about it. And so in some ways, when we reflect on different spheres that we're out, I sometimes even feel like I'm more out in the workplace than when I'm with my immediate family, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so Joel and I, we just, given everything that's been happening, we had planned to get married in 2023, but we decided to just elope in a month, actually. Yeah, in February.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been an interesting experience because I think marriage also brings out different ideas of heteronormative ideals. And so I asked my parents in a WhatsApp message, like if they would come to the wedding. And I'm still waiting to hear back from them. Yeah. And so I guess I was wanting to know how you have been dealing with or coping with the different levels of acceptance that you're experiencing across the spheres of your life.
Yeah, thank you. Well, congratulations. That is so exciting. Yeah, it's so difficult. I think the situation with my family's probably quite different than yours, but with my extended family, like being very Catholic, maybe that's kind of similar to your situation. I think, for me, I have to just like recognize that, my parents or my mom, really, my dad's totally fine, but my mom has her own journey through this, and I have to just kind of look out for my family. And, we talk a lot about how to protect the kids from it in a way, like, cause I don't want them to experience this like homophobia that she is imparting on me and hope. And she has a hard time accepting our relationship. I mean, she's very much like in our lives at the same time, which is just this bizarre piece of things. But yeah, like she's very much like in our house, in our home, but still very wary of this relationship and distrustful of it. And it doesn't value it to the same way that I think, to the same way she should, and I don't know if that's how much that's homophobia, really. I think a lot of it is homophobia, and a lot of it is also just this, overprotection of of her children and being wary of partners in general. So,
and their own learning as well. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And she grew up in a very different time and in a very different environment than we did, and we have a lot of benefits of acceptance and stuff that she didn't have.
So we talked about, I mean, as you called it, figuring out this balance of how to come out in residency, fellowship, and then sort of how do you balance your queer identity now?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, at this point, like I've very, very much like within my group and among all of my colleagues that I work with on any kind of regular basis, like I'm completely out, and they know Hope, and they know my kids, and and that's very, very comfortable. And I'm really glad that I'm in a place like that, and glad to be in a place where that's just not an issue at all anymore for me. And and I think that's probably, I'm just trying to think, like I don't think I'm at all like concerned about sharing that among my colleagues at all. I think some of those times I'm still trying to navigate of like just those social conversations with people you don't know at work. Like when you're talking to the nurse, and the nurse is like, yeah, my kid, this, and I'll talk about my kids very freely. But there's still that kind of like, okay, do I talk about my partner? Do I come out to them? Like, and I'm trying to like get to a point where I'm not thinking about it so much. And it's just like, what happens in that moment. But I have like tried as well, like when I do have the opportunity, I think I've been making more of a point the last couple of years of like more purposefully coming out, just so that it's not subtle, I guess, or it's not like left kind of unsaid. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And I've been trying to like experimenting with ways of doing that more. And so one of the things I think about is like, I'm always asked for like a bio, like I'm giving like grand rounds next week. And it's like, how do I come out in my bio? Like it's like 3 sentences long, and so I've actually looked at like other queer professionals to try to figure out like how to do that. Cause like, how do I like, put it as like, yeah, I live with my wife and children, and that's what I ended up doing. But there's other ways I think that people have been able to come out. And yeah, even just coming out kind of with your professional work. So like for a long time, like when I was in medical school, so, still like 15, 17 years ago, I worked and helped to author a paper on transgender healthcare. And so, I remember like one of my co-authors who had been in that field for a long time is like, oh, you may not want to continue to do this. Like, you may not want to like, in a way, like pigeonhole yourself. Like at that time, only queer people did gender work, that's like shifted. That's completely different now, but like at that time, like it was really a niche. And, and she just had, just kind of said like, this may not be where you're going, and so like, even just being honest about having that as part of my commitment, I guess, my professional commitment, that's one way I've seen people put it on their bio. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out that piece of it, of how to be more intentional about coming out. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned before, just like trying to figure out how to come out to patients and families, and when it's relevant and, or maybe when it's not relevant too, just not to try to promote it necessarily, because I think our patients are like going through their own journey. They don't necessarily need to hear about all the ins and outs of my life, but very much in the context that, you talk about, Chris, but then also in that context of, well, they may not have had the opportunity to talk with someone who's queer. They may not, they may be struggling with their own differences and feel alone in that, like whatever that difference is, and meeting someone else and kind of figuring out how, or seeing them dealing with differences and how they're kind of presenting themselves can be an important part of their journey. And just like my kids don't ask about everything, like they may not necessarily ask for that. Like I might have to put it out there, and even if it's, even if the conversation doesn't naturally come to it. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about and kind of experimenting with in a way. And then also like, do you, like how much do you put the rainbows up and the pins up? And, it's very, very typical, where I work, for people to identify their pronouns on their signature or on their Zoom name, or to wear pins and stuff on their labels. And I've, like I said, I kind of moved away from all of that, but, do I go back to that and kind of, be able to do that? And yeah, I don't know the answers to all of those things, but those are the things that I kind of think about and try to figure out how to do.
Thanks for that. You kind of alluded to this, but we were wondering, like, there's obviously been a lot of change in society over the past 20 years, and we're wondering, like, what stood out for you in the duration of your career that you've noticed?
Yeah. So it's so interesting. I mean, there's so much change, when I started medical school in 2000, and I felt really lucky. There was like 6 of us. We had our LGBT Alliance group. And so there's 6 of us in my year, and I think none in the year ahead of me and 1 in the year before. So I felt really glad that I had these 6 people. But then like, as we kind of met, we realized, well, actually, like, 1 was there for Alliance. Like she wasn't queer herself. She was, just there to kind of be in a supportive environment. And then there was another one who hadn't come out in our class, but then kind of came out later. And so like kind of trying to figure that out was interesting. But yeah, like having that kind of, those colleagues have been really, I think, important. So that's why I'm so glad to kind of hear about what you guys are doing too. But just in terms of like how things have changed, I mean, the gender stuff is like completely different where it was before, and both like on that professional level, but then also just the comfort people have to express a diversity of gender and label it as such, was not part of the conversation, like, back when I was in college and in medical school. So that's a really big shift. And just in terms of how I think we're talking about gender and sexuality differences is different. But I think that also just reflects that comfort level of the conversation in general. Like Queer Eye was such a different show when it first came on, and now it's like such a celebration, and people love these guys, and yeah, sure, there was a Queer Eye before, but it was so much more. It was just different, and gay characters on, we had Will and Grace, but like Will was never like allowed to date anyone. Like, the whole show, he was just this like kind of nebulous gay person, but not actually like living the life. So yeah, it's really shifted. I think for me personally, like being able to get married legally has like been such a huge thing. When I got married, it wasn't legal in the state that I was in. And so I had to fly to get married and get a license in a town that a state I never lived in, never planned to live in, and it's such a subtle thing. And I'm so glad I got to be legally married, even if it wasn't recognized where I was. And then it is now. But that was just like such a huge thing for me for some reason, like to not be recognized in that way was really, really hard. And now it's just like a non-issue, and when I had my first kid, because it wasn't legally recognized, like Hope had to adopt Asher. And so we had to go through this like adoption process and then get her on the birth certificate, just so that legally, if something happened, I wasn't available, like she could be, recognized and seen as a legal parent, and we moved to BC and they're like, oh yeah, you don't have to do that here. Like, what? That's great. Are you sure? Can't we just do it just in case? I'm like, no, you don't have to. So that's just a huge relief,
We've talked about it now. We've talked about it a bit. You talked before about mentors that you sort of happened upon, not necessarily queer mentorship, but definitely mentorship. So I wondered if you could talk more about how mentorship has impacted your career and your life.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think mentorship is just, when it's available, it's really, really helpful. And I think we kind of started this conversation about how you hold on to that piece of yourself, of those reasons why you went into medicine and where you hope to be at the end of it. And, sometimes mentorship can be part of that, of like trying to like keep you, being able to hold tight to that those kinds of things that are important to you. And, I think for me, I don't think I had queer mentors per se. Having people who were out in medicine was extremely important to me, even if they weren't mentoring me. Like just having those people was just so important. And when I was in medical school, we had this group. It was all a social group, but being able to like be at those parties and see these attendings and residents that it's like, oh, I had no idea. And like, I remember being one there, I worked with that guy like that week. And I was like, I really had no idea that this guy's queer. And it's like, well, who cares? But it actually, I do care, and it does matter. And so, just being that visibility, I think it was maybe just a visibility to me. I don't know. Some of them were out, some of them were not out, and some of them came out like, since that time. But yeah, so just that visibility I think is really important. And then in just terms of mentorship, I think, my mentors, the people who, I worked with very closely were very accepting of me, even though they weren't necessarily queer, but they were very social justice oriented. And to me, that was just so important. And they were very accepting and acknowledging of who I am and, and my relationship and things like that. And I think that was important. And then, just kind of along the way, I think I've found a lot of mentorship in non-medicine people too. So, being here, like working back in the community, in the schools, like one of my good friends and was very much a mentor to me, was a youth and family worker in the school, and also queer herself. And so like, even though, we're very much like trying for the same goal of positive youth development, and and so having a mentor outside of medicine those have been really important to me. I think it's the mentorship within medicine and navigating that's important. But I think just in terms of like that, being able to hold on to that ideal of what we're trying to do for the youth and for, social change, like you can find that outside of medicine too. And so that's been really valuable for me to find these other, and of course, like people are much more outside of medicine. And so like some of my community partners that I work with who are much more comfortable being out than people who I work with here, like that's been really nice to just kind of have those as like role models and mentors as well.
Amazing. We mentioned this theme of social justice throughout your career. Could you elaborate on, why it's important? Why is social justice important to you?
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of privilege in my life. And so I feel like that's it's my role or my duty to like give back and, and to help reach a more equitable society. And yeah, I mean, definitely health illness is not equally distributed in the population. And so being in this field, you have to pay attention to it. Otherwise you're gonna miss what's actually happening. As one of my mentors here says, like it's the people we're not seeing that we need to think about. Our healthcare system is not designed for some of the people who need it the most. Yeah, that's why I went to medicine. And it's medicine is such a formal, very institutionalized, very patriarchal, colonial, approach to trying to provide a service to people. And so, we have to recognize that too, and think about how can we shift it to be able to reach more, but then also to value that, yeah, it's not just about us. There's a lot that is going to help people that is not going to come from such an institutionalized approach too.
I knew there was a reason why we resonated with you, Eva. This question, I think, might be important for our listeners who may not have much queer experience themselves. And could you articulate why it's important to be out in medicine? I know that, like, for the three of us, like, we know that it's important, but for someone who might not know.
Yeah. Such a good question. I mean, I think for the first and foremost thing is like, it's important to me, and it's important for me and myself and for us as queer people to be ourselves and to be able to bring ourselves into our work and not separate ourselves from the work that we do. And so I think, for me, that's really important. But then I think the second thing is that it's important for our patients and our families who, no matter how accepting society is and how far, we've come to where we've been, we're still a minority, and there's still a lot of queer people who are not able to come out and who experience discrimination and other hardships because of it. And we've talked about how each of us have that even within our own experiences. And, so that's important. And it's important. I mean, my difference is so like, it's actually quite a luxury to be able to like not come out and not, when I don't need to, and to hide my, difference if I need to. A lot of people, they can't hide how they're different. They have a disability that's obvious wherever they go, or be from a marginalized group that's discriminated against and judged, and they can't hide that, so it's important for that regard too, for us to just be part of the diversity of our communities. And then, yeah, I think this piece too of just the educational journey and being a teacher and being now in a position where, I mean, I have an amazing job and an amazing position, and And, I think it's my job to be able to support young people coming up and who may not be in that position yet. And I have the luxury of being able to come out and not lose my job, some people still lose their jobs because they come out, or have in the past. And so I think it's important to do that in that way too.
Thank you. That's so affirming. It's been so affirming for us to hear. And we really, really, really do appreciate you being so open to doing this, and also being so open with us when we got to work with you. I'm not speaking for other colleagues, but I think finding mentors that affirm in different spaces in medicine that, queer people exist.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Not every medical career is as accepting and as open as adolescent medicine and pediatrics is. And so there is a lot of work to do so that people feel comfortable and figure out how to navigate that. And so, if there's something that I can do, to help that along, be amazing to be able to be part of that.
Our hearts are filled with gratitude for Eva in sharing their mentorship with us, and for the privilege in being able to make this podcast. As we reflect on our queer medical student journey in our final year and beyond, we stand on the shoulders of our previous generations who have paved a path for us, and we can't imagine what our lives would have looked like even just 20 years ago.
It was just now in 2022 that conversion therapy was legally banned in Canada, reflecting how much further we have to go. We truly hope this podcast adds to the changing landscape in medicine towards a more inclusive and diverse medical community. Thank you all for listening today.
This has been a presentation of the UBC Medicine Learning Network.